Hi, I'm Kathy Daneman. On behalf of Mystery Writers of America, I want to welcome you to our very first symposium event for the 77th Annual Edgar Awards. Tonight's discussion is with the nominees for Best Novel. Our moderator tonight is Jamie Mason, and our bookseller is Mystery Lovers Bookshop in Oakmont, Pennsylvania. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the Edgar's 2023 hashtag, or by visiting the website mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. The Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on April 27th. Throughout this evening's discussion, I will be posting links to our panelists' books in the chat. Please submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the discussion, and we'll get to them toward the end of the hour. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jamie Mason. Jamie Mason writes standalone suspense novels. She's the author of Three Graves Full, Monday's Lie, and The Hidden Things. And she lives in Asheville, North Carolina with her family. Jamie?
I want to start out by saying what a pleasure it is to be cyber sitting with you this evening. And I mean all of you, of course, but most particularly our 2023 Edgar finalists for Best Novel. It ended up being a fascinating education to see everything that hit the shelves last year in hardcover for crime fiction, to have watched what it took for 6 books to intersect with the sensibilities and tastes of 7 very different judges and rise to the top. It was riveting. We are all so impressed with what you guys have done. So I'm going to keep the intros brief to maximize the time we have to dig in and hear new things from these excellent writers. So our nominees are John Darnielle is a National Book Award nominated and New York Times bestselling author of Wolf in White Van, Universal Harvester, and Devil House, which we'll be talking about today. He's also an accomplished rock musician and vocalist, and he lives with his family just down I-40 from me in Durham, North Carolina. John is unable to be here with us this evening live, but he's recorded some answers to a few questions that will work into tonight's program. Kellye Garrett is the multi-award winning author of the Detective by Day series. She's also been a screenwriter in Hollywood and a magazine editor. Now New Jersey and New York based, she served on the National Board of Directors for Sisters in Crime and is a co-founder of Crime Writers of Color, which is receiving the Edgar's Raven Award later this year. Her latest widely acclaimed and Edgar nominated novel, Like a Sister, is on our minds tonight. Chuck Hogan's novel, Gangland, is his latest, and for our purposes, the Edgar nominated showpiece of his impressive body of work that includes the award-winning and New York Times best-selling novels, Prince of Thieves, Devils in Exile, and the Strain trilogy, which he co-wrote with Guillermo del Toro. His work has been produced in film and television to great critical success, including The Town, 13 Hours, and The Strain. Gabino Iglesias has crafted an influential presence in contemporary crime fiction as a writer, journalist, professor, and literary critic. His writing and reviews have appeared in the New York Times and other major newspapers, NPR, and Publishers Weekly. He's a prolific author of short fiction, and his critically acclaimed and award-winning novels include Zero Saints, Coyote Songs, and his latest, our Edgar-nominated The Devil Takes You Home. He lives in Austin, Texas. Danya Kukafka's calling to the book world inspired a move from her native Colorado to make New York City her home, where she's been steeped in the business of fiction in many capacities. She's currently a literary agent with Trellis Literary Management and has been an editor at Penguin Random House's Riverhead Books. Her best-selling novels are Girl in Snow and now Edgar-nominated Notes on an Execution. Sadly, Danya had a last-minute conflict and will only be with us in spirit this evening. And Toronto-based Nita Prose is also a publishing industry expert, having risen through the ranks over 15 years to become vice president and editorial director of Simon & Schuster Canada. Her deep and abiding love of mystery fiction absolutely shines through in her novel, The Maid, our alphabetically last entry for the 2023 Edgar for Best Novel. Well, welcome all of you. And thank you for being here and congratulations on your nominations.
Thank you.
Let's talk about these great books. So I want to start with Kellye and a question about your crackling dialogue, particularly dialogue that's followed up with internal dialogue reactions and retorts. I'm going to read a little example from early on in a non-spoilery part in the story of our main character reacting to her father, Mel, who is speaking to a detective, just so that everyone can see what I mean if they haven't gotten to read it for themselves yet. Mel motioned to me, my oldest, Melina, getting her master's from Columbia. She's moving to Harlem to be closer to school. Two lies and two truths and a lie. I taught her everything she knows, Mel said. Make that 2 lies. I love the shit out of her, Mel said. Possibly 3. Kellye, you really get a lot done with dialogue, and Lena's zinging reactions to what is said to her and around her. It's just the characters pop, the plot gets moved forward, and the readers get some tremendous moments of insight and wit and humor in the conversations in Like a Sister. So my question for you is this. I know you wrote for TV, but were you ever a dramatic performer yourself? I feel like I've noticed a particular talent for internal and external dialogue in writers who were. But either way, tell us how you get about putting great words in the mouths and minds of your characters.
I hate public speaking, so no, I've never done any kind of like performance. I mean, I think we all kind of have that external monologue and that internal monologue, like, you know, what we say versus what we're thinking. I know I definitely do. And so I think it's kind of easy for me to have that in the characters. I do think having that television background, I spent a season on a show called Cold Case. I have a master's degree in screenwriting from USC, like helps, you know, because in TV, everything is about, you know, dialogue and using that. And, you know, it has to sound like how people talk, but not really, because people don't really always say, yeah, exactly, say what they think or in a great way. And so I'm glad that you like that. I mean, I think I suck at description, but I do think that I hopefully make up for it in dialogue.
No, the dialogue is description. I mean, it
Okay,
really
good. Tell my
laugh.
agent and editor that.
No, you laugh out loud, and you just have these moments of oh damn, and I really dialogue is hard, and I'm kind of surprised to hear that you hate public speaking. You did it goes great on the page.
Yeah, I'm like the worst. So, but thank you. You know, and it's funny because I with my first 2 books, they were meant to be funny, and this one I just swore I was writing this serious book. And I had a friend read an early draft, and she said she was laughing on the subway, and I was like, no, it's serious. But I realized I'm like, you know what, just lean into the humor of how Lena views things. So.
Yeah, because it is serious, but you know, sometimes the most intense things we still think funny things in our head.
Yeah,
it makes
better to laugh than to cry, and that's how Lena feels.
Yes. Next up, I had a question for John that I asked him off camera, and I worded it carefully to avoid spoilers. About 2/3 of the way through Devil House, a character receives a letter, and it's almost a manifesto. It's revisited a few times throughout that thread in the story, so there's kind of an element of epistolary novel that advances the plot. Here's a little snippet from early on in that section. But I sat and I read, and sensing something immense beneath your patient detailing the pain with which you said you would live forever. Not anger, but not anger. Not resentment, but grievance. Something with a fair claim on the space it sought to hold. And I had 2 things I wanted to know from John about this. It's kind of an unusual treatment of this type of thing because we don't get to read much of the actual letter on the page. But we learn what's in it intimately by the recipient's reaction to what's there. We actually understand the contents possibly better by reading the reactions to it. And it's devastating and wonderful. So I asked him to tell us about the decision to do it that way. And sidecar to that, I asked if he'd actually written out the letter, or did he just develop it in situ as a reaction only in the recipient's mind. Kellye, can we play John's answer number 1?
This is a thing I like to talk about, because one of my things is wanting to demystify writing a little bit. I mean, obviously something mystical happens somewhere between the first idea and there being a book. Books are miraculous to me, the miracles. But most of my stuff begins with formal questions. Like when I used to write poetry, I pick a form to be writing in. Well, if it's a sonnet, then I know it's 14 lines, right? And I favor, I have Catholic bones, and I favor some sort of restrictive covenant with the thing I'm writing, right? And so with Devil House, I had the initial idea for the plot, right? As a true crime writer who's going to move into a house, right? And then I needed a structure. So I got the idea for a 7-part structure where it would be a mirror. So parts 1 and 7 would be in the first person, and parts 2 and 6 would be in the second person, and parts 3 and 5 would be in the third person. And part 4, I would have to come up with something so it would be its own thing, standing entirely apart from all of that. So then I wrote part 1, and then I wrote part 2, and part 2 was in the second person, and it was what it is, which is an extract from the narrator of part 1's book, right, which was written in the second person. And then when it came time down the line to figure out how to do part 5, the mirror part, I originally thought it would be just a continuation of his book, of The White Witch of Morro Bay, Gage Chandler's book. But when I got there, I was like, I didn't want to just sort of continue a thread that I had dropped 3 parts ago and pick it back up. I thought, I liked the way that part 2 had ended. I sort of wanted it to just hang there in space. And so I lived with it for a while. I sat there with my outline, having come that far, and then I got the idea. It doesn't have to be for that book. The protagonist of that book could be addressing Gage. And then so that was an idea for a minute. I thought, no, she writes to Gage, and then Gage addresses her. And that's how so it was the solving sort of a math problem. And that's what I like about it, because it gets to some very emotional places, but the impetus for it is structural, right? And to me, a fan of a writer like William Gass, I think, the structure is considerably more, there's more soul and spirit in structure than we often let on. It's like, I often say it's just building a house, but what happens to houses? People live there, right?
Wonderful. That's the mind of a rock star and a writer. Next up, I was going to do a quote from Chuck Hogan's Gangland, and it paves a way for a question I wanted to ask him. Here's the quote. Nicky had made a neighborhood name for himself young in the early 1960s, when Giancana was sitting on top of the world, or at least Chicago. Made a name not for violence, because that really wasn't his thing, nor thieving or making book, which would become his thing, but for bowling. Nicky, who never grew out of a childhood affection for games, was one of the best bowlers in Chicagoland. So Nicky Paseo is a fictional character, and his arc throughout the book is an act of literary invention. Chuck, you've mastered an interesting hybrid, the fiction that's nested inside a true crime story. And I wanted to talk about, have you tell us what inspired you to that approach? And ultimately, when you're doing it, does it sort of end up feeling like two things, where part of it is putting the right words on something that didn't happen and never would, like all fiction, Nicky's story, and then having another part that's choosing the right words to honor something that did happen in reality, something actually happened? Or once you've made this decision to do it this way, does it all just become one thing?
I think in the end it does, for sure. But yeah, how I came to it was I had come upon this true crime story about this gangster named Tony Accardo, who really ran Chicago for many, many years. He was really the last sort of true crime boss of the 20th century. And long story short, some thieves who they had robbed a jewelry store. He made them give the jewels back because the guy was connected. Inexplicably, some of those thieves went back to Accardo's house over the holidays while Accardo was in Palm Springs vacationing, and broke into his house looking for those jewels. So they broke into the crime boss's house. He came back. This is all true. Came back to Chicago right away. Ordered all those thieves, rounded up and killed. It was a terrible winter in Chicago too, so they shoved them into automobile trunks, so they weren't found for a few weeks. So no one really knew what was going on. And of course, Accardo didn't want anyone to know that his house had been broken into either. So it was all very mysterious, but these thieves were disappearing. And then he didn't stop there. He wanted to make an example of everyone and started killing off these other thieves who weren't even involved. And then once people realized what was happening and he was worried about the heat coming back on him, he had all the killers killed, and it kept going on and on. This sort of Shakespearean bloodbath, if you will. And I'm like, that's a really interesting story. And he was in his late 70s, and I thought that's, that might be something worth thinking about. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Tony Accardo really isn't like, he's not a good main character. He doesn't change. He's sort of at the end of his road, and I couldn't really find the story there until I started thinking about, who is the person who he directed to do these killings, who really gets caught in the middle, who is sort of pushed up against it and has to carry this out. And that's where I introduced the fictional character, as you said, of Nikki. Yeah, he's not a gangster's gangster. They've sort of had a quiet relationship. They sort of met through their wives at church. Not a lot of people know that they were involved in an earlier murder. So he's the perfect person to come in and sort of take over this killing spree. But he's not a killer himself. So he involves his friends, and it gets very, very hairy from there on in. But it was great, kind of like what John was saying in terms of him putting a structure on himself. The true crime aspect of it all. Obviously I've never met Tony Accardo. He died in the 90s. But I wanted to, hew to his story and the timeline and the general outline of that true crime story. And then within that, move my fictional character around and have him bump up against it. So, it's kind of nice. He mentioned sonnets. It's kind of nice to have that form and then to really play around within that, where there are some rules sort of set up for the story. And then you can be really creative within that loose structure.
Well, that makes sense. I can see that because the hybrid, we have a couple that, just by asking you guys these questions, I hope our audience is seeing the incredible range of types of stories that ended up appealing to these 7 judges. Like I said, it was such a delight to see how you guys resonated with us. And so, your hybridization of true crime and fictionalized character crime. It's awesome. I'm going to move on now to a little selection from Nita Prose's The Maid. So here's the quote that struck me to use. "Have you seen this?" he asked, pointing to the newspaper in front of him. He wears a very shiny Rolex watch. Even though I'm not much of a brand person, I'm well aware that Rolex is an expensive brand, which must mean that Mr. Snow recognizes Rodney's superior abilities as a bartender and pays him more than the usual bartender's salary. So, Nita, a lot has been said about your point of view approach with Molly. How much care and empathy must have been required to make her kind of unnuanced and on the nose observations of what's going on seem real on the page. And I totally agree. But something else occurred to me, more kind of from a writerly perspective, and that's the challenge of explaining each scene the way Molly interprets what's going on, while simultaneously and seamlessly letting the reader see what Molly mostly cannot. So I was wondering if you'd tell us a little about what were some of the challenges in having to make every single scene do that kind of double duty.
For me, the bigger challenge was, oh my goodness, I'm entering the terrain of the mystery world, where, as you can even tell from this panel today, there are so many people who are so brilliant at it. So for me, that was the biggest challenge. It was, how am I going to make a mystery that is a little bit different, that does something original and new, or spins something in a slightly different way. And I think that's the challenge that all of us have to face when we're dealing with this terrain of mystery and true crime. And so for me, part of the answer to how to deal with that came from that point of view. And as you say, we have Molly, who has, some difficulties with social cues, who doesn't read things necessarily perfectly well, according to, the reader. But the reader is reading through her eyes and can see more than she can. So there is some dramatic irony that happens. And the reader is actually acting like the detective and collecting clues that are really essential to the fabric of the story. And these are clues that she's missing along the way. And the mystery actually can only be solved through a kind of tacit, quiet partnership between the reader and Molly, the narrator. It's only through that union of you as a reader stepping behind her eyes, picking up those breadcrumbs that are dropped on the floor, and her understanding of what has really gone on, that the mystery is ever solved.
It's kind of fun because it's also a different take on the unreliable narrator, because she's extremely reliable. She reports what's going on. She's not making stuff up, and she's not hiding the ball. She's reporting what she sees, but it ends up being a little unreliable in that we get to, like you said, see through her eyes and go, oh, there's a little bit more to this going on. A bartender, maybe he gets paid more, or maybe he has a side hustle.
Yeah.
So that was wonderful. And that's what I mean about the swath of types of books we've covered with just this panel. I want to read a small segmented quote from early on in The Devil Takes You Home. And I don't speak Spanish, but the passage is beautiful, and I wanted to try. We didn't have anyone to blame, so we blamed everybody, anybody. El maldito universo, el cielo, la tierra, y el mismísimo infierno. We blamed her toys and pollution. We blamed God and the food we gave her and the clothes she wore. We blamed the doctors and the machines they used to see inside her. Most important, we blamed each other. And that filled us with a kind of loathing that was as strong as the love we had for our dead daughter. Gabino. So,
how are you?
hi. So I read an interview with you where you described how the term barrio noir fit your stories. And I was really struck by something you said, in essence, that the word barrio has a regular dictionary definition translation of neighborhood, but that it can also have a much deeper connotation of where someone's truly conceptually from, where they live is felt in their heart of hearts and the deepest recesses of their mind. Now, your book, another one, Hybrid, is a shocking and elegant braid of crime and horror. And the result you get from the inspiration to combine these things, I think, can only work because you really go into the most vulnerable bedrock of your characters' identities. So I kind of wanted to ask you, tell us about your fearlessness in mining these darknesses for our benefit and entertainment, and how has it been for you to get a lot of readers leaning right into what you're doing?
Well, for the last part, to start backwards, I'm very thankful because we all sit down there and we work on the stories that we want to tell. And then at the end of that whole process, we realize, wow, that was the writing part. Now there's publishing, which is like a business part. And you kind of hope that people will like it and talk about it and, help you keep doing the same thing over and over again. But to go back, to the other part of your question, it's a combination well, first of all, I work in crime, thrillers, noir, mystery, whatever you want to call it, and horror, as you mentioned. And both are very dark genres. And I think both of them fail horribly if there's no empathy. You read a character and you feel no empathy. You go through the motions of the book and nothing that happens to them sort of has an impact on you. So I try to work on the stuff that affects me. When you talk about horror, for example, I tell everyone, don't try to write what you think people will be scared of, because some people are scared of zombies, some people are scared of cancer. And those are two, very unique points of view. So write to what bothers you, the stuff that makes you feel a little unsettled, the stuff that gives you nightmares, right from there. And that will allow you to inject your characters with enough humanity to create that empathy in your readers. So I don't think there's a lot of, I don't know, I'm not brave by going into those places. It's what I've been doing since I started this thing, because it's the only thing that makes sense to tackle those demons. And sometimes people relate to that, and sometimes they give you a one-star review and call you woke. And I take both of those things with the same grain of salt, and think about the next time and what I want to tell readers the next time around, and what's affecting me right now, what's making me feel unsettled, and how I can, this is all BS. It's just an excuse. We can't afford therapy, so we do what we do. So, yeah.
I have to say, one of the things your book really made me think of, which I never had, was crime and horror aren't chocolate and peanut butter. They're actually, especially if you go to very personal places, they're the same ingredients, just in different measures. And I thought that I hadn't thought of it that way. So since Danya's not here, I was going to ask her something about the deep interiority of her characters. The whole book is super, super close third person, and it's unusual. If I ever have the chance, I'll ask her about it. But in the meantime, just to honor her nomination, I will read a quick, tiny excerpt from Notes on an Execution, in case you haven't gotten to see it yet. Whatever you eat now will not have the time to pass through you. It will decompose along with your skin and your internal organs. In a cheap cedar box paid for by the state, 4.5 feet below, in an unmarked plot at the graveyard down the road. You heave. That was it, you realize. It's already over. You missed your own last bite. So there's that. I want to talk a little bit about process with you guys. We probably have a lot of writers in here. And so Nita, I wanted to start with you. Your experience in working with writers and developing manuscripts with them, what has that done for when the story seed started to bloom in your own mind? Tell us a little what it was like to be on the writer side rather than the editor side.
It was daunting, but incredible. I always credit my writers with teaching me everything I ever needed to know to be able to write a debut and to be able to write this one too. So I feel incredibly privileged to have had the weirdest school of writing ever. And I'm the slowest learner ever because it took me 20 years. I went to school for 20 years with a whole bunch of different writers learning how to do this. It was challenging, though, to change roles. And, I often talk about when I have especially a debut author that I'm working with, I talk about something I call the labyrinth, which is a metaphor I use to describe the editor-author relationship. So, there's a writer and she's standing before a labyrinth, this maze, and she has to go through the maze to get through that narrative puzzle to the end of the story. And it's full of twists and turns, and there be monsters there, maybe written by Gabino. And so, it's a really daunting thing when you're a writer facing that maze. And, you don't know what's up ahead, but you can see a few things. As an editor, I'm on a ladder and I'm outside. I'm way up top on that ladder and I can see down. And when I'm working with an author, I can go, if you turn left in that story right there, you're going to go down to a narrative dead end. You can't see it but now, but I can see it before you can. And don't do that. Don't turn left. Take this other route. That is going to get you to the end. But oh my goodness, let me tell you, when I was just a writer and I didn't have that ladder, I couldn't see. And I've always reckoned with, that emotional, psychological difficulty of being a writer. I've always seen writers say, I don't get it. I don't understand where I'm going. I'm lost. But to actually feel that, to have that ladder taken away was something I will never forget. I will always treat my authors with more empathy now that I've actually felt that myself. And it really is a vulnerable position to be put in. It's also wonderful to be in that position as a writer. And that so much grace and story comes from being in that position. But wow, it is disorienting.
No, this is, I was so excited to get to this part because to pick all of your beautiful brains for process stuff. Kellye, what is muse wrangling like for you? Do you get mugged by the muse at random, like waking you up at night or distracting you while you're trying to do other non-writerly things? Or is she more polite with you and comes when summoned, when you are fingers over the keyboard or pen in hand, however your press is? How do you get there when it's time to make your story happen?
My muse is the laziest, rudest person on the planet. She never wants to show up when I want her to. I do, a lot of times I do have what I call my back brain, you know, like if I'm doing something else and I think, like, everyone has their own process. I don't write words on a page every day. However, I do think about my book every day, and sometimes I just have to think. I have a journal that I'll just do some free thought. I can't read later because I can't read my handwriting, but just to kind of get the ideas flowing and to think about things. And I think, to me, as part of my process, the thinking is just as important as the writing, because especially with the first draft, the writing sucks really, really, really bad. And it only gets better with second or third or sometimes fourth draft. But yeah, like, I'm not like that. I'm not that author who's like, yes, this character came and just spoke to me one night. Like, that's not me. Like, Lena is what I made her. Every decision I decided. She did not tell me, I told her. So that's how it is for me. I know it's different for other people though.
No, you make me feel like 45% less crazy.
Okay, good.
That's great. Gabino, you are and have been prolific. Did the writing The Devil Takes You Home, did that feel like a logical progression of the style you've cultivated, or did this one leap out at you with some different creative and practical force?
It was a very weird book to write. I think it took me about 2 years to write the first 45,000 words. I had 3 jobs. So I was writing in like 30-minute increments while teaching 4 different high school classes. So I was eating with one hand and typing 40,000 words with one hand. And then the pandemic rolled around, the time we don't talk about rolled around, and I lost my job and suddenly was like, I can't go out. Everything's closed. No one's hiring. And I'm unemployed and uninsured during a global pandemic. I need to make something happen. And so suddenly I was forced into, I guess, the life that I wanted, which was like, you wake up in the morning and you have to write. And it was like, okay, so it's now or never. So that process was much different than all of my other books, which I wrote 15, 20, 25, 30 minutes at a time, wherever I could. This one was sit down in maybe June of 2020. And then by October, it was done and edited, and out it went, and found a wonderful agent. So yeah, I don't trust this process because it's new to me, but suddenly having time, I'll still, from Kellye, I find myself not necessarily writing more, but sitting there and thinking more, because it's like I need to have all the ideas lined up, because the muse, I don't know her. She never shows up. I have to, yeah, I don't know, anger and caffeine, and that kind of brings out the whatever you want to call it.
That might be what she's made of. We do not know what she's made of. Anger and caffeine sounds great. No, I love it. Chuck, Gangland revisits the world of organized crime. Sandbox, you played it before. I'm really curious how Gangland was different than Prince of Thieves, but I also want to know, you do a lot of other kinds of writing, horror and military. Tell us a little bit about these different things that pull on you, and how Gangland was different or the same.
I mean, I think in terms of novels, my own novels, I'm definitely a crime writer, and then I got into horror with Guillermo del Toro, who had what I thought was a brilliant idea. And I think Gabino will identify with this. He had this great horror idea, but he wanted to do it. He wanted to tell it in a crime procedural way, and that's how we got together. And so that was, I mean, it was great. I've always been a horror fan. It was an amazing opportunity to indulge, that side of me. And then some of the others, I mean, 13 Hours sort of, came to me as, it was such an incredible true story for me. I mean, it's a military story. I don't have any military background, but it was the nature of the nonfiction, nature of it. Again, it was something new, something I hadn't done before, and it was just another learning experience / great experience. So I really try to seek those out. Try to keep one foot in a bunch of different worlds. It's the great thing about writing novels, where you make all the decisions, which is good, but also can be really bad when it's when the going gets tough. To television, where it's hyper collaborative, and you're meeting with different departments and wearing so many different hats. And then movies kind of fall in the middle there, where there's a time where you're off by yourself writing, and then there are times where you're in the room with others trying to figure it out. It's really I consider myself really fortunate to be able to move back and forth between those sort of three different realms, because sometimes you want to be by yourself, sometimes you want to get some help from some other like-minded people.
The flexibility that you've exhibited and either steered into or fallen into, it really sort of encapsulated what I got from being on this Edgar committee and seeing all the books. But this thing that I could take as a writer, reading these books and seeing how much there's, I always hate the phrase "one way to skin a cat," because what is the one way that everybody knows? But you guys in particular, because you really did rise right up, and the spectrum really encouraged me in the idea of flexibility. I did ask John the question about how did Devil House compare to what else he's written, and asking if it was easier. Kathy, can we have John's answer number 2?
Yes,
Maybe.
maybe.
If it's going to be technical difficulties, we can.
Come back to me.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I do have a little bit of a lightning round about something a lot of writers might want to know. And what I'd love to hear from is, how did you learn that your book was nominated for an Edgar, and what was your reaction? Gabino, go.
I didn't even have time to check my email. I saw it on Twitter first, and I thought it was a joke.
That works for you, Gabino. That works for you.
It's on brand.
So yeah, no, I had to go to the page and double check before I said anything, and then I had to process like the whole page. Like, could they really fake it? Like, is this still a joke? But yeah, no, it was Twitter. It was the good folks on Twitter letting me know.
That's fantastic. Chuck, how'd you find out?
Same. I forget what I was doing. It was in the morning, and someone posted something like, "Oh, the Edgar are out. Some of my favorite books made it." I'm like, "Oh, cool. I wonder, what's going on." And then I saw my name there, and I think I choked on my bagel or whatever I was eating and then yeah, that was it. It was really a bolt out of the blue. I will say too, for all the I've been nominated for awards before, and really being nominated is like the win. I mean, when you think about all the books out there, as you were saying, so many books, so many good books, and just to be sort of somehow selected out of hundreds and to come down to whatever it is, 5 or 6 is really gratifying, and I'm sure we all feel that way. From here, you have a 1 in 6 chance of winning, but prior to this, it was like a a 1 in whatever, 250, 300, really long odds. So
513.
I was gonna say, I
Yeah.
heard it was more than that. Yeah, there you go.
that's I mean, that's pretty amazing. So I guess that, once the news sunk in, that's really what I thought about, was wow, that's really, and then I'm just excited for my book too. It's like one of my kids. It's like, oh, I'm happy for the book. That's great. The book is doing okay.
Wonderful. Kellye, how'd you find out?
So with Crime Writers of Color, we're very like a supportive group. So whenever nominations come out, like Left Coast or Agatha's or Anthony's, usually I will see who's nominated in our group, and I will send a congratulatory email out to the whole group so we all can celebrate. So I knew the Edgars were coming out, so I went to check to see who in our group was nominated, and there my name was. So it was a nice surprise, and Gabino's name was there too. I think there's a couple other people from our group who are finalists this year, so it's kind of a really exciting time for us. So.
That's fantastic. Nita, how'd you find out?
Same, social media. And of course, in my natural way, I was like, well, somebody's obviously made a mistake, because I don't have any emails about this, and they typed in the wrong name, and yes, it's going to go away. So don't get your hopes up. So of course it turned out to be okay. But yeah, it was a lovely moment to find that out for sure.
I gained such an appreciation for, like I said at the beginning, what it takes to hit enough points on the sensibilities of a bunch of people that are all very different in every way. And it was actually, I might sound silly, it's such hard work, but I found it amazing, and it was exciting to see the intersection and go, oh, we found books that so many of us responded to. This worked great. So we do have John's answers lined up. Kathy, let's play both his answer about how his book was different, and then we can just go on into number 3 and how he found out about his nomination.
A number of times on this one. There were a bunch of places where I put at the end to see what would happen. Because it's very long. It's a much longer book, and that was one of the things I set out to do, was to write a book that was a house, right? There was a big structure, right? And so it took a lot longer, and I went through a lot of different things. And the main thing is I learned more writing this one along the way than with the other ones, because there was a whole different. I didn't have the whole book plotted out from the beginning. I knew the basics. I know Gage Chandler is a true crime writer who moves into a house where a crime took place, because that's his shtick, right? That's what he does. But what the lessons were going to be from that, I learn as I go, right? And there was a whole other plot line. It took place in a whole different part of the country. And I began asking myself who had standing to tell people's stories, because I was setting in a place that I hadn't grown up in. And then I moved the action to the West Coast, where I did grow up, and where I felt like I had a little more standing. And then I realized these questions of who has the right to tell whose story were kind of primary to my story, right? And that's when it sort of took off. Right? That's when, and I had to throw away tens of thousands of words. The original part 5 was very long. It had a lot of actual police procedural stuff in it, and all gone. And I had to do so much research, and I kind of loved doing that. I enjoy just taking a great block of text and hitting delete, although of course there's backups of it somewhere, but they'll probably never be seen. When I felt more sure, I mean, with a long book like this, I don't know, there's somebody, I forget who, a poet, said, that writing is never finished, only abandoned, right? So.
Are we going to see his Edgar thing? How he found out?
Yes.
Oh, beautiful. He's so cute.
I was in a recording studio with my band, and I'd been working on stuff for days and days. And so I'm in this space of, recording sessions are very long days, 12 hours and more. And so it was morning, and I opened up my phone, and I went, "Oh my God, I've been nominated for the Edgar." And so you have to understand, the thing about me is that when I was young, genre fiction was a major concern of mine. I was mainly initially a fantasy and science fiction guy, and then I sort of specialized into horror, reading it as a reader. I tried. I mean, we're talking about when I'm 12 and 13 years old here. I tried doing some early horror writing, but I knew all about all these smaller awards, about the Hugo and the Nebula and the Edgar and there's another one. Those were the major ones that I would hear. I would read all about. I would get the Alfred Hitchcock magazine would cover it, and I was very keenly interested in it. So it's a memory from childhood of knowing about this thing that was from a smaller niche of writing, and I always liked the presence of smaller niches. I don't believe in enforcing genre boundaries harshly, but I like genre. I like there being a space where there are some loose rules within which you can be working, and then when you transgress them, it has some power and force. I mean, all the best stuff, I think, in all the genres we like, the ones that really blossom are the ones where somebody does something a little different. Like, I'm a Jim Thompson fan, right? Jim Thompson does a lot of playing around with the first person suddenly intruding and stuff like that. So I was immensely honored. I can't even it made my day.
That's really nice. And I like the fact that he brought up the mixing of genres and the blurring of the subgenre boundaries. Oh boy, he doesn't need to, he fits right in with you guys. So this was fantastic. We have a few minutes. I want to thank you all for these wonderful peeks into what you've done here. I'm so excited for all of you. I have such a cool position of knowing what you guys did from an objective point of view to be here, and it's really been a privilege to talk to you and see you. I'm delighted to turn over to the audience questions. Let's see what we got going on here. Let's see here. Let's see. Q&A. Okay, so we have one from Jim Ziskin. He says, "Congrats to you all, so well deserved. Tell the truth. What swear word or stream of swear words did you scream when you heard you were nominated for an Edgar?" You guys are on your own on this. I mean, I am the queen of cursing the blue streak, but this is all about you.
I said, "Holy shit." Am I the only person who cursed?
Everybody else was just a bunch of delicate flowers. They wouldn't say shit if they had a mouthful of it.
I went with one that's very special for me as a non-native speaker, and I would tell my non-native students when I taught ESL classes here in Austin, if you learn to use this word properly, you will understand English. So I read the tweet and then immediately thought, the fuck I did. And then that's when I went to the website. So yeah, that was mine.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nita,
I was
please.
going to say, I have no doubt that I swore a blue streak. What I said, I have no idea, no recollection of the exact words, but I'm sure there was plentiful swearing. The good swears, as I like to call them. The good swears.
Yeah, for me, I think it was either egads or aw shucks, something really strong like that.
I swore a whole bunch when it was not going to be a problem. Like there were easily all the nominees we needed, that there was no, because it was not impossible that all of our judges would turn in an entirely separate slate of books out of didn't happen, and it was super exciting. So I swore a bit too, but that's just any day that ends in Y. So I'm going to get this wrong, but Laura Hernandez says to Gabino, you didn't say Chingasonis? I'm probably butchering that. Chingasones.
Chingazones.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, Laura, that one, it didn't came to mind at the time. But I will keep it in mind. And if I ever get nominated to anything else, I'll have that one in my pocket.
Do you guys want to go around? Some people hate this question. I would love to know what you guys are working on right now. What's next? Kellye gave a nod. Kellye, do you want to tell us?
Because here is my 9-page single space edit letter from my editor.
Okay.
So I can say, so a few years ago, I went to a writer's retreat at a friend's house in Baltimore. She was not there. It was a beautiful 4-story row house. And I think I was the only Black person in the neighborhood. And I was like on the bedroom on the 4th floor. And I said, I could walk downstairs tomorrow and there'd be a dead body in the foyer. And I have no clue how it got there. So that's the idea for my next book. It's about this Black woman and her boyfriend who come to New Jersey for a romantic getaway. She comes downstairs one day, her boyfriend's gone, and this missing white woman who's been all over the news is dead in her foyer. And she doesn't know how she got there or what's going on. And it's called Missing White Woman. And hopefully it'll be out next year. Fingers crossed if I get this edit done.
That's fantastic. Anybody else want to spill the tea on what they're doing next?
Sure, I can. So I'm actually doing a sequel to The Maid. So it is going to be a prequel, actually. And you know, if The Maid is a whodunit, a mystery novel, and a sort of feel-good fiction, or as the Brits call it, uplifting literature, this sequel combines 2 different genres: the mystery one for sure, and a sort of adult fairy tale, a Gothic adult fairy tale. And it deals with Molly's past, and we get to learn a lot more about her relationship with Gran and what her childhood was like.
Oh, I'm glad we get to see more Gran. That's wonderful.
And somebody else is very, very dead, I assure you.
Oh, dear.
Very
Oh,
dead.
dear. Of course. Chuck or Gabino, what do we got?
When I was in high school, a friend of mine had a mom who worked at a club checking IDs, and she was brutally murdered. She took 2 bullets to the face. And I always knew that I wanted to be a writer, but I also knew that there were certain stories that I didn't have the skills to tackle yet. And then when The Devil Takes You Home started getting a lot of love, I was like, maybe I have it now. So that's the starting point of the next one. A group of friends, one of their moms gets shot in the face while working. This is back home in Puerto Rico. Obviously, the authorities do nothing. Another brown woman dead, big deal. So they set out to try to crack the case. And then it's usually, you know, it's my book. So it's like a lot of good times and they have ice cream and nothing goes wrong. And it's a child's book, but that's what I'm working on.
Cool. That sounds good. I'm working on a couple of other things like television and features. This is actually my first novel that I wrote alone in almost 12 years. So I was really gun shy getting into it, but now having had a really good experience writing it, I'm hoping to carve out some time soon and get back to something else. The ideas are kind of lined up on the runway. I can't start taxiing until I get some room.
That makes sense. Well, I think I will, if I get a chance next month, I'll have to collar John and Danya and ask them to tell me what's next. But anyway, guys, this was a beautiful conversation. You guys are amazing. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgar's 2023, or by visiting the website mysterywriters.org and www.edgarawards.com. And put on your calendar, join us Saturday, April 1st at 1 p.m. for a conversation with the nominees for Best Short Story and the recipient of the Robert L. Fish Memorial Award. Thank you guys so much, and good night, and I'll see you next month.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank
that
you.
was lovely.
Thanks, Jamie.
Thank
Great
you
job.
so
Thanks.
much. Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Kathy, too.
Bye all.